America is known as the land of the free and is the world's leading center of technology and politics. At the same time, it is also the epicenter of international challenges. For a place with a developed technology like America, it is like a double-edged sword. In that context, there was an event called Zero Day. It was a large-scale cyber attack across the country. The story begins on a fateful day, when the entire U.S. power system suddenly collapsed. This was the biggest threat America had ever faced. In just 1 second, the entire U.S. lost power. This caused all kinds of machines to stop working. Even cars on the road were affected. Immediately after, the car was hit by a train and flipped over. And the identity of the person in this car was not simple at all. She was the memoirist for former President Mullen. 10 minutes ago, she had just left Mullen's house. What was even more frightening was that at that time, the phones of all Americans simultaneously displayed the same message: "This will happen again." After hearing the news, former President Mullen was both surprised and worried. This attack could be said to be the most serious terrorist attack that the United States has faced since its founding. Although the attack only lasted for a minute, it caused a widespread power outage across the United States, affecting the electrical system in many places. It took control of many traffic control devices. The computer system that controlled the country's basic equipment was also robbed, and even the safety warning system was burned, leading to many traffic accidents on the streets. The power in the hospital was also cut off, and even the backup generators could not be used. Doctors were operating without lights. Patients in the emergency room needed machines to keep them alive. Due to the power outage, they passed away. Even the pacemakers of some patients stopped working at the same time. Planes flying in the sky also had problems. As a result, not just one but many plane crashes occurred. This incident was called Zero Day. For Mullen, the worst thing for him was that his wife and daughter were not home at the moment. He was extremely worried, afraid that the flight or the car they were on would have an accident. Fortunately, he finally waited for his wife to return. The next day, all the people rushed into the streets because of the terrorist attack. Mullen's personal assistant Roger brought orders from the White House. The current president hoped that Mullen, a former president with a reputation in the hearts of the people, could go out and soothe their minds. He only needed to appear for half an hour. Mullen could hardly refuse the enthusiasm of the current president. But as soon as he stepped out onto the street, agitated people pushed the fence and rushed to beat people. Faced with such a dangerous situation, all the security guards were bewildered. But Mullen remained calm. He was not afraid. He spoke up to reassure the people. "What's wrong? The terrorists want us to argue like this." Mullen's voice seemed to have magic. It made all the angry people stop and listen to him. Mullen asked everyone, "Is it any use for everyone to stand here shouting and screaming like this? We are all Americans. At times like this, we should unite as one." With just a few sentences, he was able to calm the angry people. When getting in the car, the driver couldn't help but praise him. If the driver was allowed to say one sentence, it would be that Mullen was truly outstanding. But Mullen's daughter felt very annoyed after receiving the news and immediately called to blame her father. Mullen had retired from politics, but his daughter Alexandra had just entered the political scene. She was currently serving as a congresswoman. She thought that her father's appearance at that moment would only make things worse. Mullen was not surprised by his daughter's attitude. Beyond the halo of a president, he was simply a father being blamed by his child. A few days later, the incumbent President Evelyn made an appointment to meet Mullen. However, the next night, Mullen's wife held a party to celebrate her becoming a federal judge. Mullen could only keep promising his wife that he would definitely not return to politics. He had only come to meet the incumbent president, and then planned to return in time to attend the celebration. Unexpectedly, as soon as he met the president, she gave him shocking news. Congress was authorizing the establishment of a special investigative committee. The power of this commission of inquiry was immense. It had the authority to monitor, search, and arrest. When necessary, it could detain individuals without a search warrant or a personal protection order. It was a fusion of law enforcement and intelligence agencies into a single system. Simply put, they had the power to act first and report later. Matters that other agencies could not handle were left to this commission. Hearing this, former President Mullen had to interrupt Ms. Evelyn, pointing out that even after the 9/11 incident, they had not resorted to such measures. He thought this was a bombshell, as a commission with such unchecked power could easily lead to dictatorship. Yet Mullen did not expect that the incumbent president would throw this bombshell to him. That day, Evelyn had sought him out with the hope that a respected and prestigious senior like him would agree to take over the commission of inquiry. She hoped that he would investigate the truth and uncover the person behind Zero Day. Mullen did not answer her immediately. He thought carefully. In the end, he still decided to meet the head of the intelligence agency to ask about the situation. Then he made an appointment to meet with Agent Nathan. He had been an informant for many years. From Nathan, he learned some information related to Zero Day. Nathan informed him that for the past 6 months, the Russian intelligence agency had been funding a group of hackers in New York. These hackers were mostly gangsters. They operated ransomware applications, crack e-wallet passwords to steal money. They would provide some things that were beneficial to the Russian intelligence agency. The Russian consulate received this dirty money to invest in other dark espionage activities. At the same time, they were also very happy to see these hackers causing trouble for the US government. According to the information Nathan had, the leader of this hacker group was named Felix. He had built a server cluster in the Bronx. This server has a huge information processing capacity. Its processing power is so powerful that it can not only mine the necessary amount of Bitcoin, but also launch a large-scale cyber attack. But that's all the agents said. In fact, both of them have retired. Agent Nathan felt that it was dangerous to get involved in this matter. He did not want to continue participating in this case. He just wanted to live in peace for the rest of his life. Nathan told Mullen that maybe one day when Mullen called, he would not answer the phone. Mullen's daughter also advised her father not to accept this mission. On the contrary, Mullen's assistant Roger tried to approach Mullen's daughter. In fact, the two had been in love before. Alexandra did not take Roger seriously. Alexandra asked why he needed to know. Would he get a raise by doing so? She also revealed that she knew that his hedge fund had shorted 2 days before the attack. This time, Roger approached Alexandra not for work. Actually, he just wanted to talk to her alone. During the party, Mullen suddenly heard loud music. He quickly walked into the room and ordered the butler, Hector, to change the music. Hector was a little surprised and asked him what was wrong, because his words surprised the others. There was no music here. Mullen realized that he might have been hallucinating. He was a little confused and hid in the room. Mullen's wife saw the guests off, and then the couple talked privately. Mullen originally wanted to promise his wife that he would not return to politics, but the power of the investigation committee was really too great. It was like a nuclear weapon. Mullen's wife asked if that was why he had to take this job. In Mullen's eyes, they had turned this into a terrifying nuclear weapon. If Mullen didn't accept it, then who could the government have felt safe in trusting such dangerous weapons to? If the situation has already become this bad, it would be better to let honest and simple people like them take charge of guarding the arsenal. At least it could ensure that the person holding this dangerous weapon did not randomly shoot anyone. That night, Mullen received a phone call from Agent Nathan. He told him that he had just investigated some things. In order to avoid Mullen forgetting, Nathan told him to take notes. Mullen immediately sat up, picked up a pen and paper, and started taking notes. Then put the diary in the safe. The next day, Mullen followed his schedule. He accepted the reporter's invitation and announced his decision to accept the incumbent president's invitation to take over the Special Investigation Committee to investigate Zero Day. But in the group of reporters, he suddenly saw Anna, who was in charge of writing his memoirs, who had died during the Zero Day incident. This made Mullen jump. In the blink of an eye, Anna had disappeared. Was he hallucinating, or was Anna still alive? What secret was hidden in it? More and more questions were swirling in Mullen's mind, and he was eager to get them resolved. As he was about to take a plane to the headquarters of the Special Investigation Committee, he received another call from Nathan. But this time, the noise of the plane was too loud, so he couldn't hear what Nathan said clearly. Mullen could only run back to his room, open the safe, and take out the notebook with the clues that Nathan had given him. But no matter how he turned, the password to open the safe was still wrong. Mullen felt even more confused. The bodyguards outside also became worried. They stood in front of the door, asking Mullen if he was okay. Then they broke the door and rushed in. Inside the study, Mullen smashed the family photo, and he found a new password behind the family photo to open the safe. But as soon as he opened the diary, his expression immediately changed. At this time, the bodyguards also arrived, asking him if he was okay. He immediately replied anxiously that someone had broken into the safe and replaced the diary. His words left the bodyguard extremely confused. Mullen returned home, intending to find the butler to ask. But here, he met a completely strange black man. Mullen immediately approached him, asking who he was and where Hector was. Seeing Mullen screaming, his wife rushed in to stop him. When her husband asked, she immediately appeared confused, not understanding what was going on. It was obvious that the white butler, Hector, had retired 5 years ago. Hearing this, Mullen was so shocked that he stood still and could not say anything. He wondered if he was really old. If he had discovered that he had a problem with his mind yesterday, he could have refused to take the position of chairman of the Special Investigation Committee. But today, the press conference had already been held. He could only risk going to work. As soon as he arrived at his office, he heard bad news. President Evelyn was preparing to to announce that the zero-day incident was caused by Russia in 3 days. Anyway, the hesitation and indecision were Russia's fault. If there was a problem, just deal with Russia. 72 hours. This was the proposed time for revenge. Hearing that gave Mullen a real headache. Evelyn said that in just 3 days, he had to investigate whether the zero-day incident was caused by Russia or not. But before investigating, he had to find out what kind of members this newly established Special Investigation Committee was composed of. A quick look around showed that the members of the investigation committee were mobilized from different departments. The manager under Mullen was Carl from the Department of Justice. Mullen asked everyone how much information they had at the moment. A member of the investigation committee said that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had responded to what they had investigated. They had investigated and found that all the systems were affected at the same time, but they could not find out why those systems were all controlled. To put it simply, the attacker who carried out the control withdrew without leaving a trace. They were completely confused, with no evidence in hand. The only thing they could be sure of was that if the other group wanted to, they could immediately launch a second attack. At this moment, clue came. In an attic in the Bronx, a group of hackers were being executed. The camera recorded a curly-haired young man running away, but the system could not identify the other party. At the same time, it also recorded an image of an agent Alexei. This person was from the Russian consulate. Originally, the Pentagon's opinion was that the zero-day incident was caused by Russia. Now the agent from the Russian consulate was also involved. Mullen's subordinates suggested that instead of continuing the complicated investigation, it would be better to take advantage of the current situation to blame Russia for the attack. This was to quickly end the matter. Mullen interrupted his subordinates. He told them to continue investigating, not to speculate wildly. The first thing they had to do was find out who the unidentifiable curly-haired guy was. What they needed to do was not find an excuse to blame someone, but to find out the truth. In the end, the meeting ended there. Mullen returned to his office. His personal assistant Roger was very worried about him. Mullen could only lie that what happened this morning was just a misunderstanding. The new butler had changed the safe password, and his reaction was a bit too much, because after all, his work had been too stressful these past few days. Then Mullen assigned Roger to investigate Anna. He wanted to investigate whether the cause of Anna's death was as reported by the media. But after leaving the headquarters, Roger did not immediately start investigating, but instead went to see a tycoon. That tycoon praised Roger. He asked Roger if he liked the feeling of being in the spotlight, especially the constant ringing of the phone. This tycoon wanted to take over Russian oil, so he wanted Roger's help. Roger seemed hesitant, so the tycoon continued to entice and threaten. He said it was good that President Mullen still trusted Roger. He wondered if Mullen knew what this tycoon knew. Would things become different? That night, President called Mullen. She heard about the hacker organization, and she thought this was a good opportunity to speak up, to punish Russia. But Mullen told her not to act rashly, or else she would be taken advantage of. He had a very trustworthy news hunter on his side. If the two of them talked tonight, they might learn the truth. The president reminded Mullen that in just 48 hours, she would be speaking at the White House, announcing the expulsion of the Russian ambassador and the imposition of sanctions. If Mullen wanted to stop her, he had to have solid evidence proving that this was not Russia's doing within the next 48 hours. Meanwhile, at the company, a female CEO of a media company who owns a technology empire was also expressing her opinion. She said that this incident was extremely serious. Perhaps the US government could only handle it with help from their side. Their country's government could not handle this on its own. Mullen was at a loss. Fortunately, his subordinates were still quite useful. Early the next morning, they received good news. They had investigated the identity of the man. It turned out that the other party was a person from the US government. He was in the electronic warfare unit of the security agency. At the same time, he was also the top offensive hacker in the US, but they did not know where this guy was. At the same time, Roger brought bad news. Anna's body had disappeared from the morgue. Everything seemed to be caused by a spiritual force. Roger was even more confused. On this side, Roger's wife also felt that her husband could not handle so many things by himself, so she went to find the most capable female chief of staff who had ever worked for Mullen. This chief of staff could do a lot of things, but the problem was that she could do too much. There was a time when she had had an affair with Mullen and had given birth to a daughter. Mullen's wife was a woman who thought about the big picture, so she knew that only the chief of staff could help Mullen at that time. So she forgave the chief of staff, who was also her husband's ex-lover. She made an invitation. Mullen's wife asked the chief of staff to help Mullen for her. On this side, Mullen was already having a headache because of the investigation, but the Congress increased the pressure on him. They approved the establishment of a supervisory committee to supervise the the investigation committee, and the head of the supervisory committee was Alexandra, who was Mullen's daughter. Mullen watched the live broadcast on TV. He could only quickly call Roger to talk to his daughter. On the other side, the Justice Department's warehouse brought bad news. A certain general started preparing weapons to plan for World War III. It was said that the Pentagon wanted him to attack the Russian oil field. The time of action was that night. Roger was responsible for trying to persuade Alexandra. Roger said that he knew she hated Mullen very much, but that moment was not the time to take revenge on him. Alexandra was so angry that she laughed. It was not that she wanted to take the opportunity to take revenge on her father, but what he needed at that time was to quickly end the investigation. She just felt that the matter was too complicated. In order to protect her father, she thought it was best for him to quickly end the investigation. The two of them finished talking about work, and then it was time to talk privately. Alexandra invited Roger to form a group with her. He asked if she was talking to him as an ordinary citizen or as the official chairman of the supervisory committee. Alexandra's answer was also very simple. It was an invitation, not a summons. Of course, Roger could only cooperate with her. The two of them slept together in the room all afternoon. At that time, the members of the investigation committee were working very seriously. Finally, they managed to capture the curly-haired young man Patrick before he left the country. At that time, Patrick did not know that he had just escaped once, because not only did the Special Investigation Committee want to capture him, but there was also the agent Alexei, who had been sent to destroy the entire hacker organization. Originally, the agent had wanted to kill Patrick to silence him, but when he saw Patrick being taken away by the members of the Special Investigation Committee, he could only turn around and leave. But not long after leaving, he was hit and killed by a truck. When he went to prison, Patrick was very honest. He told the police everything he knew. He said that he had only wanted to create an application to expose how dangerous the things the government made were, but he had never thought about using them. And the real name of the Russian agent Felix was Andy. The two were classmates. Patrick had no idea that Felix was a Russian agent. He even thought Felix was like him, a fellow believer in hacker ideology. On this side, President Evelyn was only 3 hours away from giving a speech at the White House to impose sanctions on Russia, but now they had almost no solid evidence to stop Evelyn. On this side, Roger and Alexandra finished their work and returned to the apartment. As soon as he turned around, he saw that the Russian ambassador had shown up without any invitation. He had been sitting properly in Roger's house for who knowed how long. The ambassador said that this matter had nothing to do with them. It was all because Felix had too much ambition. He had colluded with a group of hackers, and they were just doing some nonsense without any blackmail or self-destruction program. The Russian side admitted that they had not thought it through carefully, but now Felix and the hackers had all been dealt with. In return, he gave Roger a piece of information for him to pass on to Mullen. That was, he could interrogate the arrested Patrick. Patrick could testify that this has nothing to do with Russia. It was someone else who hired them to cause the zero-day incident. Of course, he still had some evidence. Taking these, Roger did not dare to delay. He immediately returned to the headquarters of the investigation committee. He quickly handed the evidence to Carl of the Judicial Department for him to verify. After confirming that these were true, 6 weeks before the hackers caused the zero-day incident, they had received a large sum of money. This money did not come from Russia, but from North Dakota. Through investigation, this account was related to a domestic terrorist organization called the Death Squad. This was a negative terrorist organization. The Treasury Department had confirmed that Russia did not sponsor zero-day in this case. Carl told Mullen that it was all done by our country. The information was finally given to the president at the last second before Evelyn spoke at the White House. She canceled the online speech and ordered that the information be verified. It was at this moment that Mullen finally remembered what Nathan had said to him on the phone that night. At that time, Nathan revealed a mysterious weapon called Proteus. He suddenly understood. At this time, Evelyn's speech at the White House was canceled. All the pressure was on Mullen. He stood in front of the camera lens of the reporters to talk about the progress of his investigation. He investigated that the virus used in the zero-day attack was created by the National Security Agency, but the virus was released by the staff and the agency and was exploited by the terrorist organization Death Squad to create a weapon. This weapon was called Proteus. At the end of the interview, Evelyn immediately called Mullen. She criticized him for saying that because it would increase the internal conflict in America, making people believe in anti-government conspiracies even more. Mullen only said that if he was right, she would be the person who had lead it. Mullen simply said that if he was right, she would be the one to lead. And if he was wrong, Evelyn could remove him. She didn't need to care about other things, just leave this to Mullen to investigate. On this side, the head of the intelligence agency suddenly told Evelyn that they were investigating the Death Squad squad. They existed, and they might be involved in it. Moreover, the government did have a plan called Proteus. It was just that this thing was different from what Mullen had thought. Recently, Mullen had been hearing sounds that didn't exist more and more often. He didn't tell anyone and blamed it on the side effects of the medicine. He poured out a bottle of medicine that had the side effects of making him hear sounds that didn't exist. Mullen's ex-lover, Valerie, had returned to his side and become his assistant. In Roger's eyes, Valerie seemed to be a very useless person. She was immediately kicked out of the core team. Roger was annoyed when he saw this woman. He gave her a sentence of, "Do your job properly this time," but he could only express his dissatisfaction to Valerie. As for Mullen, he still obediently told the results of his investigation. Anna's body disappeared from the morgue and was just a misunderstanding. In fact, she had already been buried by her parents. Mullen asked Roger if they were sure it was Anna, but Roger hesitantly replied that it was because how could parents mistake their own child? Mullen was still not reassured. He insisted on digging up Anna's body for a DNA test. At the same time, the investigation committee also began to hunt down the terrorist organization Death Squad. In just a moment, there were many videos online of seemingly normal people being taken away by the investigation committee. Different opinions began to appear online. Many media sites were cursing, saying that Mullen had gone to people's homes without a search warrant and taken them away. This was causing public confusion and trampling on democracy. The National Assembly also began to put pressure on Alexandra. They asked her, as the chairman of the Oversight Committee, to come and talk to Mullen. On this side, Alexandra wanted to meet her father when she knew that Valerie, who had an affair with her father, had returned to his side. She held a position below one person and above 10,000 people, becoming Alexandra's father's comrade. Alexandra immediately called her mother to tell her, but unexpectedly, her mother told her that this was her own idea. Because Valerie used to be the best chief of staff next to Mullen, now her father would be torn apart if he made one wrong move. Only Valerie by his side could protect him. But Alexandra thought that her mother's words were covering for her father. The enemies inside and outside made her uneasy. On the internet, a media outlet that specializes in false news invited a mother to cry and accuse the investigation committee of arbitrarily arresting people. She cried as she said that her child was only 17 years old, but they put a hood over his head and dragged him out of bed. Reporter Green continued to make the situation more tense. He said that this was exactly what he had warned about. Mullen and his gang had trampled on all their civil liberties. He then reported that the tycoon Lyndon liked to abuse children. He had sold all his stocks before Zero Day. Mullen was cooperating with Lyndon. He went around arresting children to satisfy Lyndon's strange hobby. They joined hands to do bad things. Green also boldly declared that he had grasped Mullen's weakness. Not only were there baseless rumors from the media, but immediately after, Mullen's daughter led people to storm the investigation committee. She demanded that he prove that his actions were legal and in accordance with regulations. Mullen told Alexandra that she could tell her colleagues that he was still sane, but he wouldn't come out to prove it. On this side, when Roger opened the coffin to examine the body, he accidentally met Nathan. It turned out that Nathan had come there specifically to find Roger. Since the previous party, Nathan had been deliberately avoiding Mullen, but he still wanted to protect Mullen, so he kindly reminded. Nathan was sure that they had already started using tricks on Mullen. Was he having hallucinations? Nathan then left a warning with a hint. Mullen would definitely lose that battle. He had to resign immediately and return to his small house. At that point, it seemed that Nathan was secretly hinting that the person behind the Zero-Day incident had done something to Mullen, causing him to have hallucinations. On this side, Mullen struggled to bear the heavy pressure with symptoms of occasional hallucinations or hearing sounds that didn't exist. The work of the Special Investigation Committee was not very smooth. After the investigation, they discovered that they had actually arrested the wrong person, but more importantly, they arrested a total of 48 people. But after interrogation, nothing was found. After Mullen looked at the files of these people, he quickly identified a stubborn guy named Hayes. It seemed that this was the leader. This person was a discharged soldier, capable of dealing with the police. But Mullen was a prosecutor. The thing he was least afraid of was stubborn people. He personally went to the interrogation place and sat across from the suspect. First, Mullen talked about discharged soldiers. They had all been soldiers. That year, Mullen had participated in the Vietnam War and had known an interpreter named Nguyen. The interpreter had saved him more than once. His only hope had been that Mullen would take him back to America, but Mullen had not done so. But the discharged soldier in front of him was not like that. He was a good man, and he had brought his interpreter from the Iraq War back to the US. Now they are friends and play pool together on the first Tuesday of every month. But then, Mullen immediately changed the subject. Their friend Isar was arrested by the Navy, and his father's insurance was suspended, so so he could no longer get dialysis. Mullen told Hayes that he had a son who was now 7 years old, and that he had a son who had passed away 12 years ago. Outside the interrogation room, Valerie could not bear to listen any longer, and quickly told the others to turn off the camera. In the interrogation room, Mullen seemed to dig up all his wounds when he talked about the pain of losing his son. Finally, he changed the subject again, telling Hayes that his wife had relapsed, so he had her arrested. His son had been taken away by the welfare home. But if thinking about it, the translator, his father, and his son were only 3 people in total. Even if he ruined 3 lives, it couldn't be compared to killing more than 3,000 people. Mullen gave Hayes 10 minutes to think. He wanted to know how the malicious app was modified and who controlled it. Just like that, Hayes had to endure a series of psychological attacks from Mullen, making him feel desperate. At the same time, Roger went to see the tycoon Lyndon. Lyndon said that bastard Green was always badmouthing him. In order to kill Green, he gave Roger some photos, wanting Roger to transfer them to Mullen so that he could borrow someone else's hand to eliminate the enemy. Roger originally didn't want to do that, but Lyndon threatened him that his loyalty was touching. But when Mullen discovered Roger's true nature, everything was meaningless. On this side, Hayes finally couldn't stand the pressure and confessed everything. At one protest, he met a mysterious figure who was very aggressive, wanted to reset the economy and redistribute wealth and turn America into ashes. This person knew the security agency had a plan and also knew how to get it. Hayes said that guy had joined the death squad last year. Of course, Hayes didn't know his real name. He called himself Leon. Zero Day was Leon's idea. The money was also Leon's. First, he opened a bank account of a ghost company overseas and put $1 million in it and transferred it to the hacker group. Then, the hacker gave the malicious application to the discharged soldier Hayes so that he could give it to Leon. It was said that Leon brought the malicious application to a certain server cluster. They sent someone to the server cluster that Hayes mentioned. There was still no result, but Mullen was attracted by a detail. It was a catchphrase of Hayes. That phrase was, "True freedom is the right to say what others don't want to hear." This catchphrase was a famous quote of the reporter Green, who specialized in spreading false news online. Mullen immediately suspected this reporter. Maybe he grasped the information so quickly because he was the one behind this. At this time, Roger accidentally brought up a group photo of Hayes, the hacker group, and Green. Mullen immediately identified Green as being involved with the death squad and ordered his arrest. On this side, Green was on air without knowing that his nightmare had come. He was still talking nonsense. On the news board, he continued to report on Mullen harming people with knocks on the door late at night. At this time, Mullen was no longer angry. He watched the news and said, "Not everyone is afraid, Green." Maybe he was afraid because he was hiding something. That night, Roger sneaked into the room when no one was around and secretly opened Mullen's notebook. He found a lot of nonsense inside. These nonsense scared Roger pale. He felt like he had touched the darkest secret. Unexpectedly, Mullen, who was in power, was no longer sober. And at this time, on the other side, Green was hugging his wife and children to sleep when he was pulled up and taken away by the special forces. Valerie felt that doing so was wrong, so she secretly made an appointment to meet with the leader of the intelligence agency. She asked the other party why they had to restart Proteus, but the leader of the intelligence agency said that this plan had been stopped a long time ago. Moreover, that year it was Mullen who asked to stop. However, just because they did not continue to do it did not mean that others would not continue to do it. On this side, Lyndon received the news and immediately took action. They wanted to use Green's arrest to cause trouble, stir up public discontent, and attack Mullen. In the middle of the night, Mullen did not return home, but specially went to prison to visit Green. People always called him a fool. Now it was Green who was the fool. After Green was arrested, the unknown hacker group continued to launch attacks on U.S. banks. President Valerie could only order the closure of banks nationwide to avoid the collapse of the banking system due to the attack. People immediately became chaotic because they could not withdraw money. Mullen worked overtime to force Green to confess, but Green was very arrogant and refused to give in. He told Mullen to lock him up and torture him. Green also told Mullen to lock him up as long as he wanted because it would be easy to increase views for his channel. Green also invited a lawyer to sue them. Carl smiled and said he was naive because they were not a normal law enforcement agency, so he had no right to invite a lawyer. But Mullen was more relaxed. He nodded and allowed Green to invite a lawyer to talk to him. However, when he entered, the lawyer's face was extremely bad. He told Green that he did not come here as a lawyer because Green had no right to invite a lawyer. They only let him in to advise Green to come to his senses. If the lawyer could not persuade Green, God help him, because the Special Investigation Committee was determined to find the final answer. If Green refused to talk, they could only accuse him of being uncooperative and be forced to take tough measures against him. Hearing this, Green was a little confused. On this side, side, Mullen was not much more comfortable. The boss Monica had gone online to cause trouble, writing articles about Green's arrest and inciting people to anger. The extremists were incited and started attacking Mullen's house. Mullen's media department had suggested that he could make Monica an ally. She was not unreasonable. She simply wanted to be respected. Mullen could only agree to meet Monica for half an hour. When he returned to his office, he was informed of shocking news by Valerie. He had mentioned Proteus at press conference before, but it was not a cyber weapon. That thing was actually a nerve weapon. Valerie had specifically sought out the team that had previously researched Proteus. From there, she had confirmed a lot of related information. It was a nerve weapon, and its purpose was to cause brain damage to the target at a certain distance. The symptoms caused by this weapon were dementia or neurosis, lack of sleep, irritability, hallucinations, and memory loss. Mullen could only admit that he had encountered similar situations. He had heard sounds that did not exist, and even seen dead people. At that point, everything was explained. It turned out that he had become a confused person because he had been attacked by a nerve weapon, but then, the problem was who had used this weapon. On the other side, the Speaker of the House was talking in front of President Evelyn. Now that Mullen had caused a big problem, so he suggested that Evelyn find a way to make Mullen resign on his own. Evelyn asked him again if Mullen looked like an idiot. How could he resign on his own initiative? Dreyer brought up the old story. Mullen had left the White House before. No one had ever done that before. No one would be surprised if Mullen resigned. But Evelyn said the two things were different. At that time, because his son Mullen had passed away, he could not accept this shock. But now, his children were still normal. There was no way he would suddenly resign. Speaker Dreyer implied that history often repeats itself. On the other hand, Roger suddenly remembered hearing Lyndon using a certain radio wave to communicate with some people. He quickly found an old radio and adjusted it to a certain level. Sure enough, he heard some strange people using a very strange language to talk to each other. He quickly wrote down what he heard. But Monica and Mullen's meeting was not pleasant at all. The important thing was that Monica's ability to attack was too strong. As soon as they met, she criticized Mullen for having too many conflicting reports and implied that he had to ask her for help. When Mullen said that he was not interested in the conflicting information and took the initiative to extend the invitation, Monica immediately publicly criticized the Special Investigation Committee, leading to a very tense argument between the two, which made the meeting very bad. So the intention of making Monica an ally also disappeared. After that, Evelyn put more pressure on Mullen. She urged him to present important evidence within a day. Because the bank was attacked and its operations were suspended, people had started to panic because they could not withdraw money from the bank. If it continued, there would be riots. If it did not work, she could only declare the bank open again and treat this attack as blackmail by hackers. While Mullen was very busy, his wife came to put more pressure on him. She asked Mullen to prove that he was completely sane. Otherwise, she would tell the whole country that Mullen had a mental problem. On the other hand, it seemed that the mastermind behind the plot knew very well that Mullen was not in his right mind. Lyndon's men came to see Roger and threatened him. He wanted Roger to make Mullen's illness public. Not only that, he also asked Roger to find evidence that Mullen was mentally abnormal. Roger had no choice but to go to Mullen's office. He opened his drawer and took out the diary full of nonsense. At this time, Mullen was undergoing a mental examination. In fact, he was still hearing sounds that did not exist. But fortunately, he was able to distinguish between his own hallucinations. In front of the doctor, he did not reveal any flaws and successfully received the results that proved that his mind was normal. After Mullen's wife knew that her husband was still conscious, she forgave him. Mullen continued his work. He only had one day to get the results, so he could only use force against Green. It was not that Green did not want to confess. He had confessed everything about destroying evidence of tax evasion, but Mullen did not believe him. He believed that the people in the death squad had participated in Green's program, so Green was definitely one of the people behind everything. He didn't say anything because he was stubborn, and their interrogation methods weren't enough of a deterrent. After Mullen nodded, a few men in black covered Green's face with plastic bags. Green was tortured to the brink of death and back, yet he still refused to confess. Mullen found that the other party was really stubborn. While Mullen was working, Roger ran out of his office to go on a date with Alexandra. After thinking for a while, he finally decided to tell Alexandra everything. Roger said that he had some things to tell her. Maybe the media would report some news about Roger tomorrow. Roger confessed everything he had done for Alexandra. It sounded like hacking his love rival's phone, finding evidence that was unfavorable to the other party, and sending it to the media to make the rival break up with Alexandra, and the bribery case as well. After saying these things, he finally felt relieved. But Roger didn't expect that when he returned to the apartment, the bodyguard from this morning used the excuse excuse that he refused to provide evidence to prove that Mullen was mentally ill and gave him a dose of poison. After Roger stiffened, he stripped off all his clothes and carried him into a bathtub filled with water to make it look like Roger had overdosed on drugs and drowned in the bathtub. Early the next morning, Evelyn received a message. It was that the hackers had suddenly agreed to take responsibility for the attack on the US bank, and this group had nothing to do with the zero-day event. In the group, there was a hacker who had made an even greater sacrifice. He even agreed to let the government arrest him to end the malicious application. The bank was about to reopen, thus, the spearhead would shift to the attacker of the bank this time, and Mullen, who was involved in the zero-day event, also requested that the bank not be reopened. Speaker Dreyer took the opportunity to say that they had always asked Mullen to cooperate and answer, but Mullen refused. Speaker Dreyer said that it was okay because they would ask Mullen's wife to answer instead. If Mullen's wife also refused to answer, they would be held in contempt of Congress. On the other hand, early in the morning, Mullen received information that was much worse than the news that Evelyn blamed the hacker organization. That was, Roger was dead. When he entered Roger's apartment, he was pulled back to the moment he learned that his son had died. Mullen's son's crime scene was exactly the same as Roger's. Next to him was a bottle of drugs. It looked like he had overdosed on drugs and died. But we all know that Roger was poisoned by someone else last night and then thrown into the bathtub to drown. Seeing the skillful movements of the men in black, along with the hidden meaning words of the Speaker Dreyer earlier, history often repeats itself. Perhaps Mullen knew. To defeat the discharged soldier Hayes, he had to attack Hayes's kindness. Mullen's opponents also knew very well that killing his most beloved son would make Mullen so heartbroken that he would give up presidency. At that time, this trick had worked, so they used it again. Roger's death made Mullen so heartbroken that he collapsed. When he returned home, he told his wife that she didn't need to defend him when testifying to the Oversight Committee. He originally thought that no matter what happened, he would be able to reluctantly cope, but perhaps he was wrong. He began to feel that he was old and useless. It was a mistake to agree to this position from the beginning. He was the one who killed Roger. His wife could only comfort him endlessly. And because Mullen was no longer in the mood to work, Green was finally released. Carl finally confirmed the truth. The photos of Green with people related to the case that Roger brought were photoshopped using extremely sophisticated techniques. Bad news kept coming, but Mrs. Mullen was a woman of great mental strength. She was a judge and the First Lady. She was not afraid to testifying before the Oversight Committee. Dreyer's questions were extremely sharp. He asked her if her husband had broken the law. Mrs. Mullen did not back down from answering him. Dreyer must have been referring to the accusations that had been made in the media and had not been proven in court. Dreyer asked her again how she felt about his mental state. Mrs. Mullen replied that it was stable, but Dreyer did not give up and continued to ask how stable it was. Mrs. Mullen calmly replied, after what the country had been through, what we had done, how stable was his mind. Dreyer could not find any loopholes, so he could only ask if she agreed with the level of power given to him. Mullen's wife immediately countered. It was given to him, and her husband did not ask for this power or position. Someone on this side immediately asked, so should he accept it? Mullen's wife laughed. She replied frankly that the founders certainly never thought that Congress would give their husbands such great power. But on the other hand, when Congress voted, what did the members of the Oversight Committee do? Didn't they vote to establish a special investigation committee? These questions left the Oversight Committee speechless. After returning to office, Mullen opened his diary and suddenly saw a letter stuck in it. This letter was from Roger. Mullen admitted that Roger had put the letter there so that he could find it easily. This was a confession letter and a letter to help them. This letter was very comprehensive. It not only recorded Roger's deposits, but also the radio frequency he had discovered. Roger's money all came from Lyndon. With Roger's guidance, Mullen finally understood the relationship inside. Because Lyndon was often targeted by Green, Lyndon borrowed Roger's hand to give the fake photos to Mullen. He wanted to use them to kill Green and frame Mullen. But this also proved that Lyndon was definitely involved in the case. If he didn't participate in the zero-day event, how could he know and sell all the shares? Moreover, he also forged photos of Green with people involved in the case. Most importantly, Lyndon transmitted messages via radio, and the death squad also communicated with the mastermind via radio. Roger accidentally heard the code that Lyndon used to communicate with others via radio, so he found this frequency. Roger even cracked Lyndon's nickname, Tyran 44. for. Based on the evidence left by Roger, Mullen successfully eavesdropped on the conversations through this frequency. But the problem was that they spoke in code, so he could only invite experts to interpret. After a day, they successfully cracked the code. The next day, Mullen told President Evelyn the good news, but she said that after everything that had happened, this was not enough. They needed a decisive result. Evelyn had originally promised Parliament that Mullen would resign today. Tomorrow, Speaker Dreyer would replace him, but considering Mullen's submission of important evidence, she would give him another day. Mullen returned to the Special Investigation Committee and came up with a plan. If Lyndon had disappeared, he might as well impersonate Lyndon on the radio. Then, he made an excuse that there was a file that had not been destroyed and ordered his subordinates to go to Roger's apartment to destroy it. After finishing, he used Lyndon's account to go online and give orders. The people below were not on guard. The people from the investigation committee did indeed catch the person who came to clean up the scene. They then investigated and found out that this person had a close relationship with Monica. It was Monica's employee. With the other party as a witness, Mullen immediately ordered Monica's arrest. Seeing this, Monica live-streamed at home. She planned to continue using public opinion to obstruct law enforcement. Monica live-streamed and said that everyone was about to see a desperate act. And Mullen was not only desperate but also dangerous. On the one hand, Monica also wanted to call for help from the person on the other end of the radio device. As a result, she received no response. She knew she had been abandoned and could only ask to speak to Mullen. Monica was only willing to negotiate with Mullen and Valerie. No one else, and no recording. As soon as they met, Monica demanded that she receive immunity from all punishments, but Mullen refused resolutely. Unexpectedly, Monica took out a DNA sample she got from a genealogy search engine to threaten Mullen. This DNA belonged to Valerie's daughter, Lily. She was curious about who her father was. Monica compared the DNA and confirmed that she was the daughter of the former president. She threatened Mullen, forcing him to exempt her from all punishments. She said she could reveal many secrets to him. If she was not spared from all punishment, Monica would release the DNA report to the media. Valerie was in pain and despair. She did not want her children to be hurt. For a moment, Mullen did not know what to do, but very quickly, a gunman appeared in Monica's house and made the decision for them. These gunmen ignored Monica's objections and orders. They opened fire madly against the members of the investigation committee. The investigation committee could only counterattack conveniently, finding a reason to open fire and storm Monica's house. This time, they successfully captured Monica and at the same time received a lot of information about Monica's relationship with the zero-day incident. But Mullen was still not satisfied. He felt that Monica staying at home obediently that day was like betting that someone could save her. There must be someone else behind this, and that was the real leader. In addition, although they found Monica's subordinate's poison application, they couldn't find the Proteus nerve weapon. After talking about work, Mullen and Valerie's attitude also became more gentle. Mullen told her that after these things were really over, he wanted to see Lily. On this side, Alexandra also felt confused when she received the news. She secretly called Speaker Dreyer. Alexandra asked to talk to Dreyer directly, but he asked her to talk on the phone. Alexandra asked him to stop everything. It was all a misunderstanding. Under Dreyer's reminder, Alexandra turned off her phone. Then, she took out her wireless device to contact the other party. At this point, everything was clear. It was afraid that the person behind it was the Speaker Dreyer, and Alexandra was also involved in this. At the same time, someone broke into the prison's camera and continuously showed Monica's image. When the investigation committee found out and went to the prison, they found that the classic scene had been repeated. Monica was suddenly hanged in prison. Of course, whether this was an accident or a murder, no one knew. Alexandra received the news again. She was on the verge of despair. She asked Dreyer if their men had done it. He denied it. Her companions were much calmer. Only the fragmentary evidence from Monica was beneficial to them. Alexandra could no longer continue talking to them, so she had no choice but to hurry home. She called her father and mother, saying that she needed to talk to them both now. Mullen worriedly asked if his daughter was okay. Alexandra, her voice trembling, told him to be careful. Then the entire city suddenly lost power. Zero-day replay. Mullen's house was surrounded and attacked by civilians. The bodyguards intended to use force against them, but Mullen said that it was not allowed. Only a moment's delay. The angry civilians surrounded them, smashed the car, and dragged the bodyguards away. When Mullen was in danger, a group of commandos with guns arrived in time to control the situation. Under the protection of the special forces, the head of the intelligence agency appeared. Fortunately, the intelligence agency arrived in time, so Mullen was lucky to escape. Mullen only thought for a moment and knew that this matter was related to the zero-day incident. The person behind it wanted to kill him to silence him, so he impersonated their accomplices on the radio device, pretending pretending to be one of them, and announced that the mission was completed. From then on, in the eyes of the mastermind, Mullen was a dead man. Of course, all of this was thanks to the help of the intelligence agency. Mullen benefited, and he did not forget to remind the intelligence agency that they had no right to act on American soil. But at this special moment, he could ignore it this time. He was curious why the intelligence agency came to find him. The head of the intelligence agency said a few polite words first, then said that from the beginning they had a suspect in the zero-day incident. They suspected that this matter was related to high-ranking government officials, so investigating who had been the real culprit behind it became a difficult problem. The president did not trust anyone in the inner circle. The new government needed Mullen, who had left politics, to return. At that point, if Mullen had not understood, he would have been truly stupid. Mullen had guessed that the mastermind behind it had been Dreyer, and the government had also thought that it was very likely him. Mullen had wanted to ask more about who else had been in this group besides Dreyer, but the head of the intelligence agency had only spoken in circles, implying that Mullen had to investigate for himself. Mullen understood that the reason the head of the intelligence agency had not spoken directly could only have been because his daughter had also been involved in the case. This had not been a difficult answer to guess. On the surface, Mullen's daughter had always appeared to be a close subordinate of Dreyer. If at first, Speaker Dreyer had caused the zero-day incident to scare the people and push the National Assembly to vote to establish an investigation committee, then the power of that committee had turned out to be surprisingly great. Dreyer had certainly wanted to take this agency for himself at first, using the pretext of investigating zero-day to entice the human rights gang into establishing a dictatorship. But Evelyn had chosen Mullen as the head of the investigation committee, disrupting Dreyer's plan. So he had immediately established a monitoring committee multiple times and had sent Mullen's daughter to persuade her father. Mullen felt that he was very close to the truth. He went to see his daughter. After being asked a few questions by her father, Alexandra could not bear it and immediately confessed everything. Alexandra said that the people involved in this matter had not only been her and Dreyer, but also more than 10 members of the National Assembly. These congressmen did not belong to any particular party. They belonged to both parties. It had all started with the zero-day event, which had been Monica's idea. Alexandra kept repeating that they just wanted everything to go back to normal so that America would be greater. Recently, the internal conflicts in America had become more and more intense. The two parties had been against each other, and the people had been arguing. The government could not function normally. They had wanted to scare the people a little so that they could unite and sit down to talk. Alexandra said that she had simplified everything and that she could have done more. Mullen said that she was right, but that they could only do their best. Faced with her father's criticism, Alexandra came to her senses, but it was too late to regret it. On this side, the technical staff of the Special Investigation Committee were working overtime. They were trying to restore power and communication systems across the United States. As soon as communication was restored, the news of Mullen's assassination and death was widely reported. Speaker Dreyer immediately appeared to give a memorial speech for Mullen, but as soon as he finished his speech, he received a phone call from Mullen. Mullen asked Dreyer to speak to him privately. People who intended to steal power and become dictators always pretended to be saints. Dreyer had been no exception. Even though he had been exposed, he still arrogantly pretended to be the one who had saved America. As far as Dreyer could see, half the country had been immersed in the dream of conspiracy theories and lies, while the other half had been shouting and ranking their dissatisfaction because this society had needed reform and had needed him to rescue it. But Mullen only said that destroying democracy was not the way to save the country. Seeing that Mullen did not fall into the trap, he realized Mullen was not like his foolish daughter, whose mind could be manipulated with just a few words. Dreyer then proposed a new plan. It would end there. All the crimes were blamed on Monica and the tycoon Lyndon. Mullen could dissolve the inquiry committee. Dreyer would finish his term as usual, then resign. Not only Dreyer, he also made sure that the others who joined him would also resign. Everyone left in the most polite way. Of course, Mullen could not agree to this plan. Dreyer angrily told Mullen that, as he said, treason was a capital crime. Was he really willing to do this to his daughter? Mullen did not know how to respond, so he went home. His wife, who had always been upright, silently reminded her husband that she could not lose another child. The next day, Evelyn visited Mullen. He thought that the president had come to advise him to be objective, but Evelyn said that she did not care about the truth. She only cared about being able to continue to take office smoothly. This also meant that whether he would keep quiet and protect his daughter was up to him. Mullen couldn't choose as usual. He went out for a walk. When he passed the device hanging outside, he felt a headache and heard heard a sound that didn't exist. He immediately opened it and found a device that shouldn't be there. Was this part of Proteus? He had it checked but got no results. Mullen had thought it through. Was it a secret nerve weapon or a tired old man? There were too many things to think about. These things were no longer important. Mullen had made his choice. He decided to put everything down, save his daughter's life, and then give a report that had nothing to do with Dreyer. But Alexandra also made a choice. She left a letter for Mullen, saying that she would turn herself in. After reading the letter, Mullen felt constantly anxious and extremely uncomfortable until he arrived at the Congress, in front of the congressmen and ministers, even in front of the president. He concluded the zero-day event. Everyone cheered, gave him warm applause, looked at him like a hero. He walked up to the podium step by step, but that position, to Mullen, was like an altar. After losing his son, he was forced to personally put his daughter there. While he was seriously speaking, he had another hallucination. On the screen where the speech was recorded, the words, "Who killed Bambi?" kept appearing. The sound that seemed to have become his nightmare rang out in his ears. In fact, he always had an answer in his heart. It was him who killed his son. It was him who killed Bambi. His eldest son had an accident at the crucial moment when he was about to be re-elected. The cause of death was very similar to Roger's. He both suspected that it was a political enemy's doing and felt guilty, thinking about denying his responsibility. Perhaps his son had really left this world. Perhaps it was because he had an affair, did not spend time taking care of his son, which caused him to fall into bad habits and lead to a painful ending. In this life, he could never have a correct answer. He could only be tormented by the pain of losing his child. But now it was different. He had personally spoken of his daughter's crime, which meant he had directly killed her. Thinking of this, Mullen could no longer continue. Everyone was staring at him, and he was silent. They were waiting for him to give the results. In the end, he still decided to tell the truth to protect fairness and justice. Mullen held his daughter's confession letter and read it in front of everyone. He exposed the conspiracy led by Dreyer. Zero Day was a conspiracy masterminded by Speaker Dreyer. Dreyer was shocked. He did not expect Mullen to break his word. He stood in front of the Congress and said, Mullen was a bastard. He was the one who destroyed this country with his own hands. But Mullen did not care about him. After telling this shocking news, he left the Congress. All media channels praised him for being fair and impartial, but they were afraid that in the future he would have to live with the pain of losing his child double. Above is the entire content of the newly released movie called Zero Day. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye and see you again.